The waiting is over. Not the waiting for a rumor, not the waiting for a guru's prediction, but the waiting for the moment when all the preparation, all the reform, all the infrastructure finally converges into action. Iraq has entered the execution phase, and the February window that analysts have been tracking is now open. This is no longer about what might happen. This is about what is happening right now. Let me take you inside the evidence that proves execution is underway. On February 10th, Central Bank Governor Ali Alaq sat down with Ruda and Erbil and delivered the most definitive monetary policy statement of the year. To the casual observer, it sounded like a denial. Alaq stated flatly that the central bank is not studying the topic of changing the exchange rate. He called market speculation great confusion and misplaced. He dismissed any link between the budget deficit and currency adjustment as an incorrect link. But you must learn to read what central bankers do not say. Alaq did not say the rate is fixed forever. He did not say the rate reflects the true value of the currency. He said the central bank is not currently studying a change. That is a statement about the present, not the future. And more importantly, he spent the rest of that interview describing, in extraordinary detail, exactly what the central bank is doing. And what they are doing is executing the most comprehensive monetary reform in Iraq's history. Let me give you the numbers that prove execution is underway. Alaq revealed that Iraq's foreign reserves now exceed $100 billion, including more than 76 tons of gold. The money supply stands at approximately 100 trillion dinars. But here is the number that reveals the scale of the execution. More than 80% of that money supply exists outside the banking system. 80%. Trillions of dinars circulating in the shadow economy, invisible to tax authorities, unavailable for productive lending, and entirely beyond the reach of monetary policy. This is not a sign of a healthy economy. This is a sign of systematic evasion. And Alaq was remarkably candid about the cause, primarily linked to the phenomenon of tax evasion and non-disclosure of revenue levels, profits and income that are achieved, especially in the trade sector. Alaq explained the execution mechanism with unusual clarity. If money owners feel reassured about the existence of a fair and transparent tax system, they will bring their money and deposit it in banks. Reassurance, that is the product that the execution phase is designed to manufacture, and the February window is when that reassurance is being built. On February 11, the Director General of the Iraqi General Customs Authority announced that the Kurdistan region has begun responding to the unification of customs tariffs with federal border crossing. Advanced understandings are in place to implement the Asakuta electronic customs system across all points of entry. This is execution. For years, one of the largest leaks in Iraq's financial system was the differential between federal and Kurdistan region customs duties. Traders would import goods through the region, pay lower tariffs, and then smuggle those goods into federal Iraq without paying the difference. The dollars that should have flowed into the central bank's reserves instead flowed into private pockets. That leak is now being sealed. On February 5th, Governor Alaq met with U.S. Chargé d'Affaires Joshua Harris in Baghdad. They discussed dollar sales, banking reforms, and ongoing cooperation aimed at strengthening Iraq's financial and monetary stability. Harris praised the significant reform initiatives undertaken by the Central Bank of Iraq and affirmed the United States' full readiness to continue supporting the efforts of the Central Bank of Iraq, enabling it to achieve its goals in enhancing financial and monetary stability. This is the international cooperation that previous execution phases lacked. Since November, Iraqi banks have had to comply with SWIFT international transfer system criteria to access their foreign reserves held at the U.S. Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve examines every request, and if there are any suspicions about the final destination, it stops the transfer. Since this mechanism was adopted, the U.S. Federal Reserve has blocked about 80% of transfer requests due to doubts over where the money was actually going. Economist Ahmed Tabakali put it plainly, there is no evidence of U.S. pressure on Iraq. The new regulations require high levels of disclosure and transparency. This came as a shock for many of our banks, who were not used to this. The February window is when these reforms are converging. On February 9th, in Erbil, Governor Alaq stood beside Prime Minister Masar Barzani and launched eSol, a unified electronic payment platform for the Kurdistan region. Alaq stated, "Everyone now understands that handling transactions with cash alongside complex economic demands is no longer sustainable. Establishing a secure and transparent electronic financial system is essential to restoring citizens' confidence in the banking sector." eSol allows citizens to pay government bills instantly through mobile applications, digital wallets, and partner banks. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no additional fees. For decades, government payments meant physical cash, long queues, and opaque transactions. Now they mean transparency, efficiency, and records. On February 16th, the central bank issued a directive that further tightens control. They announced that applicable laws do not recognize any discrimination between different editions of the U.S. dollar. Banks must stop treating old bills as less valuable than new ones. This matters because parallel market operators have long used the excuse that they need to charge more for old dollar bills to justify their higher rates. That excuse is now illegal. The official rate remains at 1,320 dinars to the dollar, unchanged since February 2023. The parallel market trades around 1,500 to 1,550 dinars. This gap represents the friction of transition. It represents the premium that the shadow economy demands for operating outside the formal system. But the gap is closing, not because the official rate is moving, but because the parallel market is being starved. On February 8th, hundreds of traders protested in Baghdad against the new customs tariffs, which in some cases reached 30%. They reported that container fees had surged from around 3 million dinars to as much as 14 million, and that infant milk fees rose from about 495,000 dinars to nearly 3 million. The protesters accuse influential groups of facilitating the release of goods in exchange for lower unofficial payments, calling it widespread corruption. Many traders are now considering routing their imports through the Kurdistan region, where fees are lower. But the government is not backing down. The Federal Supreme Court dismissed a legal challenge against the customs tariff decision, citing the absence of legitimate interest. The government's position is clear. The Asacuda system is here to stay. The February window is about convergence. The customs system is being unified across the entire country. The digital payment platforms are launching. The banking sector is being forced to comply with international standards. The Federal Reserve is cooperating with compliant banks. The government is refusing to back down from reforms despite protests. The central bank is closing loopholes like discrimination between dollar editions. Alaq was explicit about the condition for change. He said an exchange rate adjustment would only be considered if Iraq faced an inability to meet demand for foreign currency due to weak reserves. And he explicitly stated that this is not the case at the present time, not the case because the reserves are strong at over $100 billion, not the case because the gold reserves exceed 76 tons, not the case because the Asacuda system is bringing the shadow economy under control, not the case because the digital infrastructure is being built, not the case because the international cooperation is secured, not the case because the political will is holding. The February window is when all of these elements come together. It is when the execution phase becomes visible to those who are paying attention. Alaq explained the philosophy. If we link the topic of changing the exchange rate to the budget deficit, it means we have set a shaky foundation for the future of the national currency in Iraq. He said, stability is a fundamental condition for achieving economic and investment movement. The execution phase is not about a single announcement, It is about building a foundation that can support a stable currency for decades to come, the customs system, the digital payments, the banking compliance, the reserves accumulation. All of it is preparation for a future where the exchange rate reflects the true value of the economy. The traders protesting in Baghdad are not evidence that the reforms have failed. They are evidence that the reforms are working. The 80% of currency outside banks is not evidence that the economy is weak. It is evidence of the fuel that will power what comes next. The parallel market rate is not evidence of a collapsing currency. It is the last gasp of a system that is being systematically dismantled. The execution phase is here. The February window is open. The question is whether you are watching.